Okay, so picture this. It's November 2021. Bitcoin is sitting at $65,000. Your coworker won't stop talking about it at lunch. Your uncle texts you a meme about going to the moon. You finally cave, open Coinbase at 11 p.m., and throw in $2,000. 6 months later, that $2,000 is worth $600. You tell yourself you'll never touch crypto again. You delete the app, and then, 2 years later, you watch Bitcoin hit $100,000 on the news, and you just sit there, staring at your phone, thinking, how does this keep happening to me? If that story sounds familiar, or even a little too familiar, stay with me, because this video is specifically for you. My name is Arthur, and I spend way too much time thinking about how retail investors interact with Bitcoin cycles. If you're someone who keeps buying at the wrong time, selling at the wrong time, or just watching from the sidelines while feeling like everyone else knows something you don't, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, I want to show you a pattern, a very specific, very repeatable pattern that has played out in Bitcoin not once, not twice, but 4 times now. And here's the thing, it's not hidden, it's not secret. The data is completely public, and yet retail investors, regular people like you and me, miss it almost every single time. Let's get into it. Look, when most people talk about Bitcoin, they talk about price. Bitcoin went up. Bitcoin crashed. Bitcoin is at X dollars. But price is actually the last thing you should be watching if you want to understand what Bitcoin is really doing. Here's what most people don't realize. Bitcoin operates on a 4-year cycle that is baked directly into its code. It's called the halving. Every approximately 4 years, or more precisely, every 210,000 blocks, the reward that Bitcoin miners receive for processing transactions gets cut in half. When Bitcoin launched in 2009, miners got 50 Bitcoin per block. In 2012, it dropped to 25. In 2016, 12.5. In 2020, 6.25. And in April 2024, it dropped again to 3.125. Now, why does this matter? Simple supply and demand. You're cutting the rate at which new Bitcoin enters circulation, roughly in half, while demand stays the same or grows. Basic economics tells you what happens next. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just that price goes up after a halving. It's when it goes up, how retail investors respond to that timing, and what happens to people who don't understand the lag. This is the part that gets people every time. The halving happens, and then, not much. Price kind of stagnates. Maybe it dips a little. And retail investors look at this and think, see, I knew this halving thing was overhyped. They either sell or they never buy in the first place. And then, roughly 12 to 18 months after the halving, the market absolutely explodes. Let me show you the actual data here, because numbers don't lie. The 2012 halving happened in November 2012. Bitcoin's price at that point was around $12. The peak of that cycle came in December 2013, about 13 months later, at around $1,100. That's an increase of roughly 9,000%. The 2016 halving happened in July 2016. Price was around $650. The peak came in December 2017, about 17 months later, at nearly $20,000. That's a 2,900% increase from the halving price. The 2020 halving happened in May 2020. Price was around $8,600. The peak came in November 2021, about 18 months later, at $69,000. That's a roughly 700% increase from the halving price. Now you might notice the percentage gains are decreasing each cycle. That makes total sense. The asset is getting bigger, more mature, harder to move dramatically, but only 700% over 18 months on an asset you could have bought publicly is still extraordinary by any normal investment standard. And 2024? The halving happened in April 2024, with price around $60,000 to $65,000. If the pattern holds, and I'm not saying it definitely will, I want to be clear about that, the cycle peak would come somewhere around late 2025 into 2026. I'll let you do the math on where that might land. But that's not the point of this video. The point is the behavior that happens around these cycles. Here's the thing. Knowing the pattern intellectually and actually behaving correctly directly around the pattern are two completely different things. And this is where I want to spend some real time, because this is the gap that costs people the most money. There's a concept in behavioral finance called the recency bias. It basically means our brains are wired to assume that whatever is happening right now will keep happening. If Bitcoin has been going up for 3 months, we feel like it will keep going up. If it's been going down for 6 months, we feel like it's going to zero. This is completely normal. It's how human brains are built. We evolved to recognize immediate patterns for survival. If there were predators near the river yesterday, avoid the river today. But in financial markets, this instinct absolutely wrecks you. Let me walk you through exactly what happens to a typical retail investor in a Bitcoin cycle. And I want you to be honest with yourself about how much of this sounds familiar. Phase 1, the halving happens. Not much moves, maybe a slight uptick. Retail investor either doesn't know about it or dismisses it. I'll wait and see. Phase 2, about 6 months in, price starts climbing from $65,000 to $80,000, let's say, using the current cycle as an example. Retail investor notices, feels cautious. It's probably just another fake pump. Phase 3, price breaks previous all-time highs. Media starts covering it. Coworkers are talking about it again. Retail investor starts feeling FOMO, but still hesitates. I should have bought lower. Phase 4, price is now significantly above previous highs. The mainstream news cycle is in full swing. Bitcoin hits new record. Retail investor finally buys, at or very near the top of the cycle. Phase 5, correction hits. 30%, 40%, sometimes 70% drawdown. Retail investor panics and sells at a loss. Tells everyone crypto is a scam. Phase 6, 18 months later, price is back at or above where they bought. They watch from the sidelines, still bitter, still not understanding what happened. This is not a story I'm making up. A study from the National Bureau of Economic Research found that retail investors in crypto markets consistently underperform the assets themselves, meaning Bitcoin has gone up dramatically over time, but the average person who traded Bitcoin made far less than someone who simply bought and held. In some studies, retail investors actually lost money in assets that went up hundreds of percent over the same period. Think about that. The asset wins, the trader loses. Same asset. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Arthur, so what am I supposed to do? Time the market perfectly? That's impossible. And you're right. Timing the market perfectly is impossible. But here's the thing. You don't need to time it perfectly. You just need to avoid the catastrophic mistakes that retail investors make on both ends. Let me introduce you to two concepts that, if you actually apply them, will put you ahead of probably 80% of retail crypto investors. Concept 1, cycle-aware dollar cost averaging. Most people have heard of dollar cost averaging, just buying a fixed amount regularly, regardless of price. And it's solid. But cycle-aware DCA takes it one step further. Instead of buying the same amount every month, regardless of where you are in the Bitcoin cycle, you weight your purchases. Here's a simplified example. Let's say you have $500 a month to allocate to Bitcoin. In the 12 to 18 months after a halving, historically, the accumulation phase before the big run, you go heavier. Maybe $700 to $800 a month, pulling from savings or reducing other discretionary spending. When price is already run up 200 to 300% from the halving price, and mainstream media is covering it, you scale back. Maybe $200 to $300 a month. You're still participating. You're not trying to call an exact top, but you're not throwing your full allocation in when the asset has already had a massive run. And when the inevitable correction comes, 40%, 50%, 60%, and everyone on social media is saying Bitcoin is dead, that's when you either hold steady or, if you have dry powder set aside, you go heavier again. This isn't genius. It's just not being a victim of your own emotions. Concept 2, pre-committing your sell strategy. Here's what kills retail investors on the way up, just as much as on the way down. They never decide in advance when they're going to take profits. So when the price is running and everything feels amazing, they just hold and hold and hold, because surely it's going higher. And then when it turns, they're frozen. Should I sell now? It might come back, and they hold all the way down. The research on this is pretty clear. A 2022 paper published in the Journal of Financial Economics found that investors who pre-committed to profit-taking rules, set in advance, written down, removed from emotional decision-making in the moment, significantly outperformed investors who made decisions reactively. So here's what actually works. Before the asset starts its major run, ideally before, not during, you decide, if this reaches X, I'm taking out Y% of my position. You write it down. You tell someone. You make it concrete and external, not just a vague intention in your head. For example, if Bitcoin reaches $120,000, I'm selling 20% of my position. If it reaches $150,000, I'm selling another 20%. And you stick to it, even when every voice online is telling you to hold because it's definitely going to $500,000. You're not trying to sell at the exact top. No one does that consistently. You're just making sure you don't ride it all the way back down to where you started. This is where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the part I find most fascinating. There's an entire layer of Bitcoin data that most retail investors don't even know exists, called on-chain data. Because Bitcoin is a public blockchain, every transaction is visible. And over time, analysts have built tools and metrics that can tell you a lot about the behavior of different types of investors in the market. One of the most useful metrics is called NUP, Net Unrealized Profit/Loss. It measures, across all Bitcoin holders, what percentage of the total supply is currently at a profit versus a loss, and by how much. And when you overlay NUPL with Bitcoin's price history, you see something striking. Historically, the periods of maximum NUPL, where almost everyone holding Bitcoin is sitting on massive gains, have corresponded almost exactly with cycle peaks. And the periods of minimum NUPL, where most holders are underwater, have corresponded with cycle bottoms. In other words, when everyone is winning, the top is near. When everyone is losing, the bottom is near. Now, this sounds obvious when I say it out loud, but here's what actually happens in practice. When NUPL is at its highest, when your neighbor is showing you his Bitcoin portfolio and it's up 400%, that's when the most retail money floods in. It feels safest. Everyone is making money. The evidence is everywhere. And when NUPL is at its lowest, when Bitcoin dominates headlines like, "Is crypto dead?" and nobody wants to talk about it, that's when retail sells or stays away. It feels most dangerous. The data and the emotion point in exactly opposite directions every time. You can look at NUPL and other on-chain metrics for free on sites like Glassnode. Some features are behind a paywall, but the basic data is accessible. I'm not telling you to become a full-time analyst. I'm telling you that even a basic awareness of these metrics gives you a layer of context that most retail investors are completely flying blind without. Look, I want to address something directly because I know who watches these videos. You're not uninformed. You've read things. You've probably watched other YouTube videos, read some articles, maybe even followed some crypto Twitter accounts. And the mistake I see smart, informed people make is this. They understand the theory, but they overestimate their ability to execute under pressure. It is one thing to nod along to this video right now in a calm moment and think, yeah, that makes sense. I'll do that. It is a completely different thing to actually sit on your hands when Bitcoin drops 40% in 3 weeks and every headline is screaming catastrophe and your portfolio is deep red and your gut is telling you to just get out. I can't overstate how different those two experiences are. The psychological pressure in the second scenario is intense in a way that's almost impossible to simulate when you're calm. This is why I always say position sizing matters as much as strategy. If you put 50% of your net worth into Bitcoin and it drops 50%, you will panic sell. I don't care how much you intellectually understand the cycle. Human psychology doesn't work that way under that kind of stress. But if Bitcoin represents 5% of your portfolio or 10%, you can watch a 50% drawdown with discomfort, but not desperation. And that emotional space, that's where good decisions get made. Okay, let me bring this all together with concrete steps, because I don't want this to be a video you watch and then forget about. Step 1. Understand where you are in the cycle. The 2024 halving happened in April 2024. Based on historical patterns, we are likely somewhere in the mid to late accumulation or early bull phase as you're watching this. That context matters for every decision you make. Step 2. Set a position size you can emotionally sustain through a 50 to 70% drawdown without panic selling. For most people, this is somewhere between 2% and 10% of investable assets, depending on your overall financial situation, risk tolerance, and whether you have an emergency fund already established. If you don't have an emergency fund yet, 3 to to 6 months of expenses in a liquid account. Bitcoin is not the next thing to focus on. I know that's not what some people want to hear, but it's the truth. Step 3. Write down your buying plan and your selling plan before emotions are running high. Literally, write it down. Put it somewhere you'll see it. I will buy X amount at regular intervals. I will take Y% profit if price reaches Z. Make it specific. Vague intentions don't survive market volatility. Step 4. Get at least basic familiarity with on-chain metrics. Spend 30 minutes on Glassnode or similar platform. You don't need to understand everything. You need to know enough to have a second data point beyond just price when you're making decisions. Step 5. Find a way to reduce the emotional noise. Unfollow the accounts that are constantly pumping or dumping. Check your portfolio on a schedule, not compulsively. The more you check, the more reactive you become. The more reactive you become, the worse your decisions get. This is well documented in behavioral finance research. Here's what I want to leave you with. The pattern I described in this video is not a guarantee. Bitcoin could behave differently this cycle. Regulation could change things. A macro shock could change things. Something we can't predict could change things. I want to be honest with you about that uncertainty. But here's what I know for certain. The investors who consistently do the worst in Bitcoin markets are not the ones who made the wrong analytical call. They're the ones who let emotion override strategy, who bought because everyone was excited and sold because everyone was scared, who understood the theory and failed the execution. The edge in markets, especially in something as volatile as Bitcoin, is not usually analytical anymore. The information is too available. The edge is behavioral. It's the ability to do the unglamorous, undramatic thing, to accumulate quietly when nobody cares, to take profits when everything feels like it can only go higher, to hold through drawdowns that feel catastrophic because you sized your position appropriately and made your plan before the storm hit. That is genuinely difficult, but it is learnable, and the people who learn it stop being on the wrong side of this pattern and start being on the right side of it. You now know what the pattern is. You know why retail investors miss it. You know what smart money actually does differently. The only question is whether you're going to apply it. If this video helped you think about any of this differently, please hit the thumbs up. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need this information. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper on the math and psychology of money, and drop a comment below. What's the biggest mistake you've made with crypto, or what's held you back from engaging with it at all? I read every comment, and it helps me figure out what to make next. I'll see you in the next one.